Wow, what a great game! Such a fun world and colourful characters. I can't believe I've never played a Persona game before. Huh, that's odd. So Persona 5 has done rather well for itself. Since its initial release in 2016, it's garnered massive acclaim and many people have heralded it as one of the best JRPGs ever made. It's gone on to become Atlus's best-selling game, which for a gaming company founded in 1986 and has made just over 300 games, yes I counted, says a lot. And also worth noting is that it's the franchise's most successful title in the West, which ironically produces the fair assumption that over here, Persona 5 could very well be most people's first taste of the franchise. And only then did more people grasp just how big it is, especially in Japan. Persona 5 was released with such prestige that Atlus infamously threatened to strike and even take down channels if they spoiled the game's plot. Its success spawned the inevitable barrage of adaptations, spin-offs, and guest appearances. You have an expansion that still costs full price, you've now got Joker and Smash Brothers, there's a terrible anime, a slightly better manga, dancing games, stage musicals, cheapy dungeon crawlers, so many mobile crossovers! And you can't watch a YouTube video about Smash Brothers or an anime analysis without hearing at least one song from Persona 5 in the background. Most of these aren't unique to 5, I mean Jesus, Persona 4 had 2 fighting games, so it's very easy to be overwhelmed by it all, and to an outsider looking in, this could be clear signs of overhype and oversaturation. So is Persona 5 good enough to deserve all this? How do I put this lightly? Holy hell, yes! Persona 5 is incredible. Its story is ridiculous but heartfelt, the gameplay is layered and well executed, the R&B jazz soundtrack is solid gold, and its characters are hilarious, tragic, and downright endearing. Such a stylish tale of underdogs battling the corrupt and unfair systems of the world with JoJo powers is as fun as it is surprisingly life-affirming. So yes, it does deserve its acclaim, and like all things that are acclaimed and popular, there's only one route left to go. A sequel. But not just any sequel, a Dynasty Warriors sequel. That's not inherently a bad thing. Dynasty Warriors is another one of those franchises. You dip your toe in and it will give you a burial at sea. It's basically what if the Three Kingdoms in Chinese history was a JRPG where the key figures were anime sword boys, each of them single-handedly able to take on 1,000 soldiers. You see this? This is the whole game. Simply slicing soldiers with one of many warlords with ridiculous weapons as electric guitar plays in the background. And you know what? It's pretty damn fun. They made a silly game and it's silly fun, and then they do it again, and again. And then make a spin-off to that. And then do that again. If that sounds like a lot, then oh, wait till we get to the spin-offs. This franchise is the video game equivalent of chips, as it's ultimately a side dish to every franchise. Whether that be Zelda with Hyrule Warriors, One Piece, Fire Emblem, Berserk, Gundam? The robot show? So what happens now is a game that is fucking everywhere merges with a franchise that wants to fuck everything, including itself. And so was birthed Persona 5 Strikers, owned by Atlus, Sega, and TECMO Games, or rights reserved. Yes, that is staying there. I love Atlus and their rational guidelines. Please let my children go. Funnily enough, the conception of the game was in 2016, the same year that Persona 5 was released. But realizing how much potential they had on their hands, they scrapped the plan to make it just Dynasty Warriors clad in red latex and into a full-on sequel. Which speaks volumes about the main game, but it does come with more questions. The main questions are, first and foremost, is the game actually good? Does the Dynasty Warriors influence add anything to the experience? And most importantly, which is the case for every sequel, does Strikers improve or damage the main game? Well folks, welcome to Curmudgeon Media. My name is Ed, and this is the first of 2 videos on Persona 5 Strikers. So let's start the show. Strikers takes place 4 months after the events of the base game. You, the incredibly sociable, soft-spoken, and occasional derp Joker, return to LeBlanc and reunite with the Phantom Thieves once again as they plan a summer road trip. But it all goes awry, and you and your chums are pulled back into various hijinks in the metaverse, a parallel universe where humanity's collective unconscious manifests as surreal structures and shadowy monsters. Along the way, you're joined by an AI companion and forge an uneasy alliance with a cop who's investigating strange occurrences across Japan. This is the best way I can summarize the plot of Strikers, and from that alone, there are two things that set off in the mind. The first being that this is a sequel to the base game, and not to the expanded version Persona 5 Royal. Put a pin in that for now. I promise you, we will get to that in due time. The second is that the metaverse is back. You know, that thing that was sealed away at the end of the base game, where we had to overcome hardships and sacrifice our powers to stop it distorting the real world? Well, now it's back, I guess. This is the first hurdle with making a sequel, which is that Persona 5 was a complete game with a poignant ending. A sequel that casually brings back the things that we fought so hard to defeat only means to cheapen the act. Initially it felt like one of those bad fanfiction sequels where the main villain actually survived, or the new enemy is the main villain's cousin.
It's Sovereign half-brother Sluggard! And he's looking for some payback!
But it's not just the metaverse, Levenza's back as well to put you in the same prison cell in the exact same prison clothes. This was not the best first impression, especially when she says,
"What awaits you ahead are more of the same. No, even greater hardships than before."
It's almost like she knows we're repeating ourselves. So how does it differ? Well, the means of accessing the metaverse has changed. In the original, it was an app called the MetaNav. That has now been swapped out for Emma, an incredibly popular AI app that caters to every request you have. But it's also a sinister tool meant to brainwash society into becoming reliant on it. Yeah, if the Siri comparison wasn't enough, how about we get the actual voice of Siri to do the English dub? No, really, they did that.
Keyword successfully entered. Beginning navigation.
And they've also swapped out the palaces. These were structures in the metaverse that took form from an individual's strongest emotions, like greed or lust. In Strikers, you now have jails, in which the person in charge of it, known as a monarch, can bring people into it using Emma and steal their desires. Doing so turns them into servants to the monarch's whims. These whims can include worshipping them as a fashion idol, buying their shoddy novel, or voting for them in elections. And not gonna lie, this is a well-executed concept. It was a smart move to not redo palaces to avoid further claims of rehashing. It establishes this is still an aspect of the cognitive world, but not the exact same as the one in Persona 5. Having them be city-wide rather than just a single building adds to the explorative parts of the metaverse and gives it a much larger scale. It's also more layered as the outer parts of the jail are still the cities, albeit littered with shadows and monsters. As you get closer and closer to the jail's epicenter, the layout becomes more distorted to what the monarch wants it to look like. They're less of a shove-it-down-your-throat metaphor and more of a personal design choice by the monarch. Instead of a lawyer manifesting a casino to signal their lack of faith in the legal system, you have an author manifesting the world of their own fantasy novels, filled with dragons and gothic castles.
Gothic castle?
That's what I said. As opposed to the palace rulers who were mostly just cold hard bastards, these jail monarchs, while certainly malicious, are all linked by a trauma in their lives. This can be bullying, lack of acknowledgement, or even domestic abuse. And it's genuinely difficult to not see the jail monarchs as people who used to be, at the very least, well-meaning, but were corrupted down the line. It makes the confrontations with them less about defeating them and more about saving them. This was the first sign of things taking a different route, and it works. Though the game is still keen to remind you of Persona 5 with its constant references. This was to be expected, of course, and your reaction may be good or bad depending on whether you enjoy the reference. But there are times it feels like a carbon copy with less of an impact. Hey, do you remember when the group sent a calling card by hacking all the screens across the city? Well, that happens again. Remember when Haru called herself the beauty thief because they couldn't come up with a name for her, and it was a cute, funny moment? Look, she does it again.
My name is Beauty Thief.
Makoto getting scared and grabbing Joker's leg and people thinking they're a couple.
I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry.
check. Remember when Haru called herself the Beauty Thief?
My name is Beauty Thief.
Persona 5 opened with a flash forward of Joker fighting alone. What if we did that, but at a less significant point? Remember when Haru was the beauty? Again, this could be seen as a fun callback or just referencing for the sake of referencing. Though the game makes efforts to appear as a love letter to Persona 5 and the franchise itself. One feature lets you cycle between multiple songs from the other Persona games, like 4 or 3. And I think that's great for people who prefer the battle music of Persona 4 over 5. And I wish both of those people well. While it loves to remind you of the franchise, it does disregard some aspects of it, and more specifically, your playthrough of Persona 5. There are two continuity issues present with Strikers. The first, and most evident, is that it doesn't take into account whether you dated anyone in the original game. There are precisely 2 times in the game where your love life comes into play. You can invite someone to a Ferris wheel with you, but they will act as if you never dated in the original. The other is when you're with the 4 female Phantom Thieves and they ask you which one you like. It would have been nice to have some acknowledgement that you chose one of them, otherwise it feels like you dated them and they forgot all about it in 4 months, which is just cruel. They didn't have to do anything major. Mass Effect 3 did this with a simple question at the start. Would it really have been out of place to ask you politely whom is your favourite waifu? The other continuity issue is perhaps more picky, but why are the Phantom Thief personas not their evolved forms? Why is it Captain Kidd and not Satan Teisei? Why Johanna but not Anat? In the main game, you had to help each of the thieves with a personal dilemma. Each of their stories had 10 steps to complete. Finishing all 10 resolves their issues and evolves their personas. There is a line that explains why Joker can't access his personal stash of no doubt OP personas, but for the others, their persona is linked to them as individuals and events that took place in the real world. Therefore, shouldn't they have their evolved forms? Unless the game implies you experienced the main game but you didn't complete their quests? Maybe you left them all at 8 out of 10 and spent the rest of the time trying to bang your teacher. That would explain why none of the girls want to date you, you bastard! Now, I'm giving you a fairly negative impression because that's reflective of how it was when I started the game. But little by little, the story actually started to pick up. Another thing that makes it stand out is the road trip element. There was a concern initially of staying in the same town again, but there's ultimately 1 jail per city, so now you're on a road trip across the country, visiting lots of different locations, seeing all the sights, and trying out the cuisine. And this is great. There's something so pleasant about this. It's a great method to build on the pre-existing concepts and even streamline them effectively. Instead of social ranks or confidant level ups, you have the bond mechanic. Everything is now condensed into a single bar that increases as you win battles in the metaverse and finish tasks in the real world with your friends. Filling the bar then gets you points. Those points can be spent on bonuses like more money or more damage from your attacks. This works well for putting you in the same mindset of the characters. Like them, it's in your best interest to explore as much as you can and talk to everyone while you're here. And it's just nice. It captures the social aspect really well and still gives you both a gameplay incentive and a character one. It even has times where, like in its predecessor, it was fun to pause the main plot and just hang out with them. I want to try some ramen with Ryuji or take a photo with Yusuke. Screw the metaverse, Makoto wants to smash a melon. And the reasons for this are because of something that was a core strength of Persona 5 and remains so in this game. The Phantom Thieves were, and still are, an absolute delight. There was an initial concern that now they're fully established, they would lose the underdog element that made you want to root for them in the first place. Without personal adversity, they wouldn't have a chance to grow, as their key conflicts were, supposedly, resolved in Persona 5. And to an extent, this is true. With the confidant mechanic replaced with the bond bar, your incentive is to connect with the Phantom Thieves as a group rather than as individuals. It sounds like a downgrade, but this allows them chances to bounce off each other effectively, which really emphasizes the road trip with your buddies vibe. There is the potential that the lack of growth can go badly, as it can result in them rehashing their traits or devolving into caricatures, which does happen a bit. Ryuji is still the dim jock of the group, but now he doesn't know how to pronounce AI, and Yusuke seems more extravagant than he was. He had his bursts of enthusiasm for his art, but mostly he was more soft-spoken and oblivious, which is what made it so funny when he did something weird with a straight face. The lobsters at the beach scene sums him up perfectly. In Strikers, it feels like they amped up the grandiose weirdo aspect of his character. But god damn it if they aren't just the most lovable guys. While Ryuji doesn't develop, he has his moments of affirmation and still has that strong defiance whenever anyone insults him or his friends. There's one scene in particular where if you're not rooting for him, you have no soul. And with Yusuke, his extravagant moments are still funny, like crying because his food tastes so good. He is also one of the characters to benefit from how the jails are used in the story. In the original, the palace rulers were in some way linked to the newest member of the Phantom Thieves, An and Ryuji's teacher, Haru's father, or even Futaba herself. How the characters relate to most of the jail monarchs is less direct and more ideological. The Gothic Castle jail revolves around an author who uses his newfound power to make people buy his novel, which is rife with cliches and even downright lifts lines from other works. As Yusuke is the pure-hearted artist of the group, he takes this personally. In the final confrontation with the author, now a defeated, pathetic man, Yusuke takes a moment to empathize with him on the unfair struggles of being a creative, and how his own personal hardships gave him the strength to become who he is now. This is where Strikers comes into its own in terms of character development. It's less of them developing and overcoming internal turmoil, but more of them reaffirming how far they've come, and what being a member of the Phantom Thieves has meant to them. Not every character is given the jail treatment like Yusuke, but they all have moments that remind you who they are. And there's something very powerful about that just warms the heart. Although, the absolute standout of the current Phantom Thieves is Haru. Haru was one of the last people to join the Phantom Thieves, and her introduction was tied into Morgana's development, so it's like she took a back seat in her own story. Additionally, we had less time with her overall as the climax of the game was approaching. This translates to some as Haru having no character, which is just plain wrong. Haru certainly has a character. She's a rich girl, but is also a floofy marshmallow of a person, likes flowers and plants, and that demeanor hides the fact that she's a bit of a psychopath.
And I'm very handy with an axe.
But now she gets equal footing with everyone else, and her mannerisms are emphasized, joked about, and even feared.
My name is Beauty Thief.
Like Yusuke, she shares a particular connection with one of the monarchs, but with more of a personal touch. This monarch is someone who knew Haru as a child and was an associate of her father. I don't want to go into too much detail as it'll take a lot of time to set up and explain everything, but it combined that personal link with a genuinely sad story for the jail monarch that clearly showed why they devolved into what they are today. And when all of this comes to a head in the final fight, I nearly cried. This was the moment I realised this game still had the magic of Persona 5, and why we connected to the Phantom Thieves as much as we did. And I'm happy to say this doesn't just extend to the main cast. Two new characters were introduced in Strikers that joined the Phantom Thieves. One is Sophia, an AI that designates herself as humanity's companion. She's a red-headed girl who uses bless attacks.
I said we'll get to Royal! Sit down!
And she serves effectively as the Morgana of this game. No memories, acts as a guide, has some link to the main villain, I'm sure. She's also a convenience for the plot and the player. As you're continually moving, there isn't a consistent service to purchase medicine and weapons. So Sophia acts as the group's merchant with the benefit of online shopping. She does fall into the stereotype of android who's learning how to be human, which is well-trodden ground, even by the Persona franchise itself. But stereotypes are not a bad thing if done well. Her main goal, aside from regaining her memories, is to learn the value of the human heart, and throughout the encounters, she learns more about the complexity of emotion. There is something effective about her asking you these questions and you're the one that has to answer them. It reveals to her, as well as you, how contradictory the heart can be, as well as how negative emotions can be used positively. Her own arc is handled as well as the rest, making her endearing and effortlessly likable.
Praise accepted.
Aww, she's like a happy penguin. Then, of course, there's the second addition to Strikers, Zenkichi. I would have put a spoiler warning that he joins the Phantom Thieves, but considering he's in the game's promotion materials as well as the opening, this was something that everybody knew anyway. I mean, who else was this gonna be? Sojiro? He is a unique member of the group, as Zenkichi is an adult, which must look rather unsettling to people looking in. It's like if the Scooby-Doo gang were joined by Columbo, and he had a goatee. However, it's important to listen to what I say next. I fucking love Zenkichi. He's a public security official who offers you a shaky alliance to take down the jails, and from the get-go, he's so likable. He has this natural charm to him that makes him feel incredibly relaxed but competent. The way he plays off everybody else, being the adult in the room, constantly trying to prove that he's down with the kids while they treat him like a senior citizen, is so fun to watch. He's also someone who reacts to the existence of the metaverse like a normal human being. When the others were introduced to it, it was typically a, whoa, what is this? And then they accepted it after a minute or when the plot kicked in. Zenkichi, on the other hand, has a mental breakdown. And it's hilarious watching this fully grown adult trying to comprehend a parallel world, teenagers with outlandish fashion, and a talking cat. Then, of course, there's his actual story. Similarly to Sophia, he too falls under a stereotype. The cop who works too much can't solve his wife's murder and doesn't get along with his daughter. Stereotype. But in spite of his charisma and relaxed attitude, there's this sadness that he legitimately tried to do everything he could to bring justice to those who deserved it, but the bureaucracy and corruption of the profession pushed him into line. Now he can't help but view himself as a jaded failure, both as an inspector and as a father. But through his relationship with the Phantom Thieves, he begins to remember who he once was and who he can become, which culminates beautifully as it always does in these games, awakening his persona. I mentioned earlier how the old cast don't fundamentally change, more they just keep true to themselves. Zenkichi is the outlier and the one that changes the most throughout the story. As an outsider let into the Phantom Thief dynamic, he becomes a core reminder of how they can influence others to become better people, making his growing fondness of the group undoubtedly one of the game's highlights. His gameplay is actually rather interesting as well. As opposed to being given an attribute like the other Phantom Thieves, he's more of a jack of all trades with a style that revolves around buffing stats. His specials include a Fury mechanic, which does extra damage but drains health. But alongside that, if you perform special attacks while Fury is deactivated, you can regain health. So it's ultimately a juggling act between strength and restoration. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Oh right, the gameplay! Thanks for watching. Part 2 should be up soon, where we go into gameplay and the conundrum regarding Persona 5 Royal. So be sure to subscribe and please leave a like if you enjoyed this video. We're also on Discord, so if you want to talk about all things Persona 5, or you just want to chat in general, check out the link in the description. I want to give a special thanks to Ode Imaginations for letting me use their fantastic music in this video. They compose fan music for games like the Persona franchise and most recently Hades, so be sure to check them out and tell them Curmudgeon Media sent you. And with that, we'll see you next time.